Superman frames Batman for murder, and we get to see DC's Godkiller in this video. How's that for an intro? So this is Batman Superman World's Finest, and I love this comic that DC has going right now. So what this does is this basically opens up with Batman and Superman alongside Robin and Jimmy Olsen investigating the murder of Simon Stagg. Now, Simon Stagg's just one of these guys where he's like a major criminal, but he does have a lot of involvement and a lot of personal goings-on with a guy by the name of Rex Mason. Now, Rex Mason is a name that some of you all may recall, but for the individuals who don't know who Rex Mason is, what's so cool about this comic, and it's one of the reasons why I love it so much, is that DC just kind of gives us a shorthanded explanation, which is great, because I don't have to go and read Secret Origins from the 1980s. So the thing about Rex Mason, and really the explanation that's given here, which really kind of comes by way of Superman and Jimmy Olsen, because Jimmy's not really familiar with it, what he basically says is that some time ago, Rex Mason was really like an adventurer and kind of like half an archaeologist. So think of him as being very similar to like an Indiana Jones type character, but he ended up falling in love with the daughter of Simon Stagg. And so Simon Stagg arranged to have Rex Mason killed. Now, where things went nuts here, right? And the way it's explained, I think is actually better than the way they explained it in the old Secret Origin stories, is that Stagg promised Mason millions to unearth an artifact called the Orb of Ra from the lost pyramid of the pharaoh Akhton, which a lot of you guys already know is based on Black Adam's mythos. Now, Java, who's basically the henchman of Simon Stagg, basically he's the guy that kills people whenever Simon Stagg doesn't want to get his hands dirty, right? That Java went inside and that Rex Mason basically learned the secrets of the orb itself, that it had been fashioned from a mysterious radioactive meteor buried somewhere in the heart of the pyramid. And that Java didn't really care about any of that. He simply just wanted to please his master. And so he threw Mason deeper into the pyramid and unknowingly, dangerously near the meteor. Mason said he could feel the radiation tearing the muscle off his bones, smell his flesh crackling and burning. Certain he was doomed, he passed out again from the pain, and when he awoke, he had wished he had died because he was so physically just screwed up. Now, here's the thing about this, and this is the part that it doesn't really explain all that well here. In the aftermath of this, he spent a long time trying to get himself sorted back out. Once he was able to reconstitute himself effectively, he basically became Metamorpho, right? The guy who could adapt his body to virtually any element in existence. Now, Metamorpho is one of these characters, he's like the absorbing man Crusher Creel in Marvel Comics, right? He's incredibly powerful, but painfully underutilized, right? Like, Metamorpho is a guy who could kill the DC universe, and it would be believable. The cool thing about Metamorpho is that this guy's been able to hold his own against the Justice League, I don't know how many times, but the big question people have here is who killed Simon Stagg? Now, like I said, the Batman-Superman team is split into two groups. So you've got Batman and Robin, who are doing their thing, and they need no introduction. And then you have Superman and Jimmy Olsen. Now, one of the cool things about this is this comic is a great reference to Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen, which for those of you guys who don't know, kind of a little bit of history here. Superman busts onto the scenes in the 1930s, right? So over the course of the next 20 years or so, it was just Superboy and Superman, and that was it. Then Mort Weisinger becomes the editor of Superman, and his role or his kind of task is add something new every 6 months, right? So you get Supergirl, you get Beppo the Super Monkey, Streaky the Super Cat, Comet the Super Horse, so on and so forth. One of the comics, or really a couple comics that you got out of this, is you got a Lois Lane comic, and then you got a Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen comic. Those comics sold like gangbusters. You wouldn't think they would, but DC could not keep those things in stock. It was crazy how popular they were. But of course, Jimmy Olsen kind of following Superman along behind this whole thing. You've got them operating as reporters, investigating on a more journalistic side, and then Batman and Robin investigating in their own capacity. The biggest issue here, right, the major issue that comes out of this is you end up having this realization from both Jimmy Olsen and Superman, these little clues and things that they find all seem to point to the idea that Bruce Wayne killed Metamorpho. And so the biggest thing that they have to contend with is, what do they do with this information? Do they keep it hush-hush, or do they bring it to light? Now, the reality here is that working as reporters, they are beholden to a kind of journalistic integrity, something that's painfully lacking in 2023. But the reality here is that they have to basically publish it. They take it to Perry White, and Perry White basically tells them, we're gonna run this article. Either we can run it with you or without you, but there's no way we cannot run an article and inform the public that Bruce Wayne is seemingly behind this. Now, the kicker is that when the information comes to light, Bruce Wayne is basically arrested. Now, there's two reasons why this happens, right? The first part is the one we just discussed, journalistic integrity, but the second part is because it's a way to basically lure the actual killer into a false sense of security. Because if the killer is out there and believes that they've captured the person who's committed the crime, then in turn, they just kind of feel compelled to just continue on and do their own thing. The alternative to this is that killers want to be caught. And so this guy would actually escalate his crimes in an effort to demonstrate that it's not Bruce Wayne, that they have the wrong guy, right? It just kind of depends on the motivation and whatever profile they have. But what goes on here, this is one of the cool things, right? What goes on here is you end up switching over to Metamorpho, who basically goes after like this small-time guy. And one of the funny things about this is that it's him kind of trying to do superhero stuff, as well as Metamorpho can do. But the thing about this is that with, kind of jumping over to Batman, where you have Metamorpho who takes out this small-time guy, Batman is incensed at Superman, right? Like, bro, like you framed me for murder, man. Like, what's the deal? And the funny thing here is that Superman's like, look, there's only so much I can do. Not even Superman can just exonerate you. And even Superman himself says, look, I know that you're not the one who committed this crime. But the reality here is there's no way that Clark Kent could know that. No conceivable way he could know. All he could do is quote unquote piece together the evidence. And unless the evidence somehow indicates you're not involved, Clark Kent cannot cook the books and just start fabricating documentation to show that you're innocent. So of course, Batman's on house arrest. So that kind of has him pissed off a little bit. But of course, Batman being Batman, he doesn't actually have to go anywhere to be effective, right? I mean, he has the entirety of the internet at his disposal and his intellect, right? The guy can just solve a crime while he's making cornflakes. And so one of the things that happens here, and initially it seems throwaway, one of the things that happens here is Oliver Queen hits up Batman and says, hey Bruce, I have an idea and I'm curious to see if you would be involved. And the question that Bruce has is, okay, like what's this idea that you have? And he says, I'm looking at basically working on an artificial intelligence project and I'm curious to see if you would be interested. Now, here's the kicker to this. Bruce Wayne really just kind of sits back in his chair for a second, kind of analyzes everything, and then says, I'll get back, right? So like right off the bat, the wheels are turning. Now, anybody who's familiar with Oliver Queen, with the Green Arrow, knows right off the bat, this is fishy, but you would only pick up on it if you've been reading Green Arrow for quite some time. Even I didn't notice what was going on initially, right? Like the clues are there if you know what to look for. Not only that, because of the fact that Batman can't actually operate with anything, you basically have like a Robin-Superman team up. Robin is riding on Superman's back. But with the two of them accessing the information Batman gave them, what he basically did is provide them with a list of Metamorpho's rogues, right? His various villains, the people that intentionally go for him. And so what Metamorpho appears to be doing is targeting each one of these individuals, but he's moving in a linear direction. And so that leads them to believe that he's basically heading south. So what they end up doing is following this trail and ultimately find themselves in this kind of war-torn territory where you have like Metamorpho facing off against just this crazy dictator type guy. And for the most part, he's taken out pretty quickly. What ends up happening is Superman stops this guy dead in his tracks, and then you switch back over to Batman. And what happens is Batman is getting a hold of Ted Kord over at Kord Industries, right? The original Blue Beetle, or at least the most popular version of Blue Beetle before Jaime Reyes. And as they're all talking, things just seem a little off and a little strange, right? Batman just keeps getting this idea that something's not quite right. And so what he does is he calls Superman and he says, I had a conversation with Oliver Queen yesterday, right? Like Oliver Queen, he's a human rights advocate, right? This guy is all about like the human element. This guy hit me up and wants to work on some kind of like technology that's designed in part to supplant human decision-making, right? The guy who advocates for human activity more than anything else is basically working on AI. Oliver Queen would never do that. The same thing's going on with Ted Kord, right? Something's off. And so what Bruce Wayne does is he says, okay, like what I need you to do is I'm currently here at the funeral for Simon Stagg, scan the area and see if anything's off. Superman, of course, having X-ray vision and being Superman from however far away he is, scans the whole area and realizes that what's inside the head of Simon Stagg is not a human brain. It's a computerized brain. It's highly advanced, but it's a computerized brain. So in turn, what they do is putting two and two together, the weirdness and the strangeness of Oliver Queen, the fact that Simon Stagg was replaced with basically a robot, and Metamorpho kind of along for the ride, which admittedly, a Batman, Superman, and Metamorpho team up is awesome. They come to this realization that someone is out there replacing billionaires with robots. Now, this is where we get to the Godkiller part of the story. And this is the thing, it never occurred to me to do this. It never occurred to me to do this. And I'm kind of astounded that it took DC this long to come up with it. But the fact that they did, it's amazing. As they're going through and they're doing all this research and all this investigation, right? Batman says, digging into all their finances, right? These individuals, these billionaires, right? Enormous sums of money are suddenly being funneled to one offshore account. And when Metamorpho asks who's the account owned by, the response of Batman, Professor Anthony Ivo. Now, anybody who knows anything about Professor Ivo will tell you this is the guy that made Amazo. Amazo is a robot that can copy the powers of anybody in the Justice League, right? So what's going on here is a guy that can duplicate powers is replacing people with robots. So of course, they end up basically following the offshore account, right? They eventually get to its location, which is effectively the modern or at least the updated location of where Dr. Anthony Ivo operates. And as they're walking through, really Superman and Robin, because again, Batman's still on house arrest, he can't just leave, right? So as they're walking through, they start to see like all these different robots that are partially finished, right? That aren't completely done. And so Superman kind of muses to himself and says that these robots are half finished because they probably stopped being useful to Ivo once Bruce Wayne became a murder suspect. And that's when Ivo chimes in and says, correct, Superman, right? And he says, it seems that you're on to me. The doppelgangers steering money my way, mine, yes, they're mine. Well, they're essentially mine. And so where you have Superman that kind of keeps goading him into talking, he says, keep talking, Ivo. Confession is good for the soul. Your marionettes are not a threat to me. And the response of Ivo is, oh, I know, they're for the boy, right? Like these robots are all for the boy. The response of Ivo is, I have something grander planned for you, Superman. I've got something far more useful planned for you. So Batman, who effectively snuck out, right? Like he literally jumped out the window of his room and snuck out without his parents knowing. Basically with Metamorpho, they're just kind of like going through and investigating the other half of this equation. But as they're going through and investigating, they find out that Ivo is literally just kind of like killing and then cloning people in the form of robots, right? He's literally getting rid of the originals and replacing them with robots so he never has to worry about the originals coming back. And then people asking questions why there's like two Simon Staggs running around. And so in the midst of all this, the different robots make their way towards Robin, but where he asks Superman for help, Superman suddenly starts to get a little off kilter, right? Things seem a little strange. His strength sort of starts to move away, right? It starts to disappear. Weakness starts setting in. And so that's when Ivo starts to commentate and he says, when I started this whole process, I thought about just bringing back Amazo and having Amazo do its thing. But then the question became, why stop there? Why just stop with copying the bodies of billionaires and replacing them with robots or bringing back Amazo and doing the Amazo thing? What if I could take the powers of Metamorpho and combine them with the powers of Amazo? So then I would have a robot that could not only copy the powers of the Justice League, but any element in existence. And so what we're introduced to is Ultramorpho, the Godkiller. This is a robot that can copy any element and any power, which includes green kryptonite. So what does Superman do against an enemy that can not only turn into green kryptonite, but beat the crap out of him with his own strength while he does it? We'll find out in the next video. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. Thank you all for watching, cliffhangers, and I will catch you all later. Peace.